All right, 10 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining the January 2025 Leadership Live Rosewood Academy. Then we got a good one. Obviously, as a kickoff of a new year, new leadership live. We got 12 of these coming, and for those who finished the 12 last year, we got a little insightful sliding here for y'all. So we always start with the why, and our why is to multiply the blessings and opportunity that has been placed into our trust, and that's our Rosewood why. We want to keep that in front of us and always right there. Our plan was to do it live here in the Hive, and so we had a prize for that. So we'll just save that for our next one, and maybe a Tuesday morning meeting. So just a heads up for the 35 of you that are on here, and you guys do join that leadership or that Tuesday morning meeting to maybe come out. Try to memorize that. So we talk about a little bit of last year, and Jay will kind of go through some of the numbers. So you want to go on, Jay?
Yeah. So last year, we're going to go through our last year's quarters themes, and as you can see, we started with professional growth, and we hit 108 participants through the 3 leadership lives during that theme. And then moving on to Q2, where we had, you can see a big increase for building high performance teams, where we had 193 participants over those 3 months. Then going into Q3, which was our highest performing month of last year, where we see 202 participants over the 3 months of overcoming challenges. And then we ended last year with Q4, nurturing workplace culture, where we still ended on a strong 181 participants. So let's see if we can't get these numbers above 1,000 this year for 2025.
Yeah, so last year it was a total of 684, and we're counting those. We're counting obviously each participant. You join 12 times. That's 12 different times that you were able to participate. So you can add a total of 12 in that whole total. And out of those 12 leadership lives, we had 19 of you guys completed all 12 leadership lives, which is awesome. So going above and beyond, these individuals right here joined every leadership live, or if they did not join the leadership live, they were able to watch the YouTube video, submit the question over to marketing for attendance. And for those who are new here, we do we keep records of these. We keep records of everyone who participated. If you joined the call, that is their participation point right there. And if you can't join the call and somehow you're on WLE or anything like that, you can just rewatch the video. And once you watch the video, there's a question at the end of that video for that session that you'll just send over to marketing, and then we'll end up taking your attendance participation point on your name for the end of the year. So again, congrats to everybody on this list. We had a big jump from last year, and so we really want to see everybody on this list. So, and if you feel like we missed you, just reach out to marketing. And as well, there's a lot of you guys who are one out of the, so if you've got 11 of them done, just reach out to marketing. We're able to give you that one. I also have your certificates here. Jay and I got these together. It has your Q4 pin on here. And you can add in your other 3 pins on there. We'll leave them on your desk, as well as you guys end up getting a Starbucks or a DoorDash gift card for the end of your prize for joining it. So we'll send those out to you guys by the end of the week. And like I said, if you feel like you're close to getting it done or 1 or 2 off, just reach out to marketing before we start sending out those prizes. Just to give a little refresh of our point system, it's simple. Like I said, each one is 1 point. You get 12 of them. You end up finishing the year off with all 12 leadership lives, which you will end up receiving all 4 pins. So each quarter is a theme, as Jay said. Each quarter you finish it out. You get a theme. You finish that theme. You get a pin for that theme. You collect all 4 pins. You end up being at the end with where you can punch them into your certificate. You can hang up on your banners, or and as well as a prize. And you'll also be recognized in our monthly newsletter that will go out at the end of this month. We'll create a section, a page right there, just kind of highlighting everyone who finished out the 2024 Leadership Live year with completing all 12 of them. And so what's new this year? We'll go into the themes for this year.
Yeah, before we hand it over to Scott, we'll just quickly go over each quarter theme that we'll be looking at in 2025. So Q1, we will be looking at strengthening leadership foundations, and I'm sure Scott has a fantastic presentation ahead of us today to open up our campaign. Q2, we've got enhancing team dynamics. And then Q3, navigating organizational growth and change. And then we'll finish off Q4 with cultivating a future-focused culture. And that is how we'll end 2025.
So before we get into 2025, we have to start it off. So starting off with Strengthening Leadership Foundation Q1, we have Scott.
Thank you, Antonio. It's always a pleasure to present to the Rosewood family of companies on the Leadership Live. I'd like to thank Dr. Fubar and Campbell University for granting me this honor of presenting the very first Leadership Live of 2025. As you can see from the photo here, usually you see kind of a headshot. I thought I'd insert something a bit different. So here is proof that I actually jump out of perfectly good airplanes. This is a tandem jump that I did back in 2011 out in Ogden, Utah. And it was quite exhilarating, and I think I will be doing it again because it was that much fun. So you all know my background. I've done a lot of things in a lot of big companies, medium companies, small companies, and acquired a lot of letters after my name. But the bottom line is I'm sort of an operations maven. That's sort of my passion, operations, but probably maybe even a little bit more of my passion than operations is actually trying to add value to others. And so by presenting this Leadership Live, I have the ability to do that. So let's talk quickly, since our, a key theme is around leadership and leadership foundations. Let's take a look at, if my clicker works here. Got it, Antonio? Fantastic. Let's take a look at leadership, right? The definition of leadership. John Maxwell is a big one who talks about, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. But the big thing for all of us is that we tend to think that leadership is a position. It's not a position. You don't have to be a manager. You don't have to be an executive in order to be a leader. What it is it's actually the action that anyone can display. Anyone can demonstrate leadership. And that's why this is a great topic for all of us, whether you're in a leadership position, meaning that you have a team underneath you, or whether you're an individual contributor. Because even though you're an individual contributor, going back to that first definition by John Maxwell, you have influence. You have influence on your teammates, you have influence on the customer perhaps, and you actually have influence on your leader. So the fact that you are an individual contributor is not a detriment to leadership. In fact, all of us have it and all of us should demonstrate it. So today we'll talk about how do you develop this leadership. So here's a question. What sabotages more leadership efforts, holds back more good teams, and derails the careers of more leaders than anything else? If you have a potential answer to that question, put it in the chat, or if you're brave enough, come off mute and give your answer.
Fear of failure.
Fear of failure, great one, John. That's a great one, but not the answer to this particular question, but close. It's a lack of self-awareness. Believe it or not, that is the most difficult thing for a leader, is actually leading yourself. And so today's discussion is around all the things that we need to do internally and mentally as a leader to become a good leader and to demonstrate good leadership. So, as Jay had talked about with our new themes, the first theme for Q1 is strengthening leadership foundations. And this particular session is self-leadership and personal effectiveness. We'll cover 5 things today. We'll talk about what does it take to become good at leading yourself. Then we want to know and work within our strengths. Yeah, this is not working very well for me, Antonio. Handle criticism with grace. Number 4 is admit your mistakes and learn from them. And finally, 5, become the best learner in the room. So leading yourself. The greatest challenge that leaders face is actually leading themselves. I talked about that when we talked about the lack of self-awareness being the biggest obstacle to a leader. But the question is, why don't we see ourselves as we see others? Well, or I should say that we don't see ourselves as we see others, because generally we tend to judge others according to their actions and results, right? So we're seeing individuals or seeing them performing, and what they're doing, their actions and their results, we are judging them. But we don't do that to ourselves. We are also harder on others than we are on ourselves. We kind of cut ourselves a break. In other words, we judge ourselves not really by our actions and results as we're judging others, but we're judging ourselves by our intentions. We know what we mean. We know what our thoughts were, or why we said a certain thing, or why we did a certain thing. So we shouldn't be held to the same standard that others are. This sort of dichotomy here about judging others according to their actions and results and judging ourselves according to our intentions is generally referred to as a fundamental attribution bias. So we are actually biased as leaders to not see ourselves the same way we see the people around us that we're influencing. And that has to change. We have to be able to see ourselves objectively in order to be a good leader. Great quote here from former president, or our past president, Harry S. Truman. You cannot lead others until you first lead yourself. Jocko Willink talks a little bit about this as well, is that that ability to understand what it's like to be in the trenches is very, very important to you becoming a leader. And in order to do that, you have to go through the same sort of adversity that others had gone through. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that in the next slide. So how do we lead ourselves better? First of all, we need to learn followership. Jocko Willink will say in the Dichotomy of Leadership, Chapter 9, the 9th dichotomy, and he says, a leader has to be a good follower, a leader and a follower. In the military, this is easy for us because you generally advance up through the ranks. And as you are at that lower level in the rank structure, you're performing the duties, the actions of those who are subordinate. Now, when you move yourself into a leadership role, let's say you become advanced and you become a platoon leader, for example, well, you used to be a member of the platoon. So you know what it's like to be one of those members of the team. And so it's very easy for you to understand and have empathy for those in which you're leading because you've been there. That's not the case often in the civilian world. You can get promoted right into a manager position, having never done the things that the people you are managing are doing. And so it becomes very important that we learn followership, meaning there could be situations that even though you are the leader or perceived to be the leader of the team or that little small group, there are others on the team who actually are better prepared at that moment in time to lead for that particular task or for a short period of time. And if you are a good follower and you recognize the fact that leadership is about influence, it's not about position as we talked about, you will grant that individual the opportunity to lead because they are better equipped at that moment in time. So we must learn followership. Great quote by Bishop Sheen here. Civilization is always in danger when those who have never learned to obey are given the right to command. Just reinforcing this fact that we have to understand the individuals in which we are leading, and in some cases, they may be better positioned to take the lead. Second item, we must develop self-discipline. If we're going to be better at leading ourselves, we've got to develop self-discipline. And so what are you doing in the dark of night when no one is around, right? What are you saying to yourself How are you treating others outside of work? Those are important things about developing self-discipline, because unless you are going to drive yourself, have accountability and responsibility for yourself, it's going to be difficult to, again, judge others the same way that you're judging yourself. So self-discipline is an important element of leading yourself. Number 3, actually a good quote here from John Maxwell. To make consistently good decisions, you take the right action when needed and refrain from the wrong decisions. That requires character and self-discipline. All right? That's what you must have. Good character, good self-discipline in order to take the right action at the right time. Got to practice patience. Here's a great quote that came from the Maxwell Leadership Podcast. Leadership doesn't happen overnight. It isn't developed in a microwave. It's more of a crock pot proposition. It has to marinate. It has to be seasoned, right, to develop good leadership. So you must be patient. You're not going to read a book and be a great leader. You're not going to be promoted into a position and be a great leader. You've got to be patient in the development of your leadership skills. There is some trial and error involved. There is obviously lots of experience that is involved, but you must be patient and allow your leadership to develop. We'll talk a little bit later about criticism and mistakes, because those are important parts of this seasoning to becoming a good leader. But you've got to be patient if you want to lead yourself better. And then you need to seek accountability. Not hold people accountability, that's important, but you personally must seek it. You must want it. You must relish the fact that you are in charge. And if things go well, you can deflect that great praise upon others. But if things go poorly, you are going to accept the responsibility and accountability for your actions and lead your team forward. That is what a good leadership does. A good leadership shines the spotlight on those in which they're leading, but then looks internally when things don't go as planned, right? Seek accountability. Don't shun it, and don't just hold others accountable. Seek it, and then take it in yourself. Again, part of learning to become a good leader. Great Chinese proverb. When you see a good man, think of emulating them. When you see a bad man, examine your heart. Meaning, look inward. When things don't go well, look inward first. Great trait of a leader. To look for that accountability that we just talked about. So here's a question. Throughout this deck today, every section, the 5 sections I mentioned in the table of contents, we're going to have a question or questions at the end. So take out a piece of paper, maybe open up a OneNote, and capture your answers to some of these questions. Again, self-leadership requires us to be reflective and understanding ourselves. So this is what this is all about. Capture this note. Think about this. I have my handy dandy little cube here. I'm going to flip it to 1 minute and give you a chance to answer this particular question. How willing am I to be honest with myself about how I need to change to become better at self-leadership? Ponder that question and write a few notes to yourselves, or a few bullets to yourself. Coming up on 30 seconds. Ten seconds. Again, use this opportunity to learn. That's why we hold these leadership lives. All right. So after we examine ourselves internally, to kind of get our mindset right, our next step in developing good self-leadership is to discover our strengths. So to discover our strengths, the first step we need to do is we need to know what our purpose is. Why are we on this planet? Why do we want this leadership position? Why do we want to influence others? We have to know what that purpose is, that greater why. We've had leadership lives and even Tuesday morning blends where we talked about our why. We begin every single leadership live and every single Tuesday morning blend with our why as a Rosewood family of companies. In this particular case, what is your personal why? What is your personal purpose? What is your personal just cause? You've got to discover that first if you're going to align your purpose, your self-leadership, and your ability to influence others. The second thing, you have to examine, what are you doing well? In other words, what are your strengths? What are your strengths? And when you're thinking about these strengths, be specific. Don't just say, I'm good with people. Why are you good with people? Is it because you can explain things in a very simple way? Is it because you're a great listener? Is it because you foster relationships? Is it because you deflect praise and you put it on them versus taking it yourself? Is it because you have a high level of empathy? Why do you have that strength, that specific strength? And it's important, the specificity is important because, as we'll see here in a minute, you have weaknesses as well. And with that, it's going to be important to know which are strengths and which are weaknesses. One way in which we can discover some of our strengths is listen for praise. I don't say seek praise, listen for praise. What are the things that people are telling you or praising you for? Most likely it's because it's a strength of yours. If someone's coming up to you and thanking you for getting something across the finish line, maybe one of your strengths is tenacity, right? Maybe it's planning. Maybe it is that dependability, right? But it's important that we understand what we are doing well, specifically, and in order to help find those things, listen for praise. But also look for compliments and notice the spelling of this word, right? It's C-O-M-P-L-E, not C-O-M-P-L-I. We're not saying look for compliments, meaning go find people who tell you you're great. That's not what we're looking for. Here, we're looking for who can compliment us, meaning if I have a weakness, who can I trust to fill that gap? Because together we can accomplish more. But you will never know who you need to recruit onto your team, your personal team, in order to cover your gaps, your weaknesses, unless you actually understand what they are and then deliberately go and find those who can complement you. Very important concept. I believe it was on one of the Tuesday morning blends, I mentioned a book by Dan Sullivan called Who, Not How. And in that book, Dan Sullivan, it's really a book about delegation and outsourcing and things of that nature. But the whole idea of it is get those others who do things much better than you do. That way you can spend your time, effort, and energy in your strength, in your genius, and have others use their strengths and geniuses in their specific area and have them complement one another. Very important concept. So discover your uniqueness, then discipline yourself to develop it. Jim Sundberg. Okay? Discovering your strengths. So a couple of questions in this regard. Again, break out your pen and paper, pencil and paper, or your OneNote, and answer these questions. Where am I strong? What are my top 3 strengths? Where am I weak? And who can I ask to help me where I am weak. 1 minute. $20. Okay, 1 minute. So based on the notes that you've taken, we now have a good leadership mindset. We know where to focus our talents and who potentially can fill our shortfalls. But what about the plethora of critics that are out there? You know, as a leader, we need to be able to embrace criticism. That's going to be our next area. So, if you want to be a leader, you need to get used to criticism, because whether you fail or succeed, you will be criticized. John Maxwell. That's one of the tough things about being a leader. You can succeed and be criticized. You can fail and be criticized. Right? In some cases, no decision, you'll be criticized. Think about the environment that we're currently seeing, whether it's in the political world, the business world. You see people out there on social media, you know, especially where they can hide behind the anonymity of social media, just criticizing everything. You know, you could go out and save someone from drowning and they'll criticize you for something. It's just amazing out there. So we as leaders, and in order to develop good self-awareness and good strength and of mind and a good solid mindset, we have to learn the following 4 things. First of all, you need to know yourself. That's kind of why we went through some of the initial questions, right? You got to have a realistic view of yourself, right? Self-awareness is your friend, okay? Know yourself. Because if you know yourself, that will be the first defense against others trying to criticize you. Because you are confident in yourself. You know who you are. You know your morals. You know your mindset. You know your intentions. You know everything about yourself in order to ensure that you are grounded and that you can now see criticism objectively. Self-awareness is your friend. The second, now, you got to be able to look at this criticism that you may or that you will receive very objectively. And when you're looking at it objectively, understand the who, the how, and the why of that criticism. Also remember that hurting people hurt. Hurting people hurt. Some people are going to attack you because it's really about them and not about you. But in order for you really to make that determination, you have to understand the who, the how, and the why of the criticism that you're receiving. But then, again, looking at it objectively, you know, destructive criticism, not constructive, destructive criticism needs to be mined for the truth. You started out with that good self-awareness, knowing yourself. You're now looking at this criticism objectively and trying to mine it for the truth. And if there's something in that criticism that is indeed true, and it's something that you need to take on board and address, do so. Take on that responsibility. We talked earlier about seeking accountability, right? We want to take responsibility for our actions. And if the criticism was legitimate, try to make the change. Okay? Whether the criticism is legitimate or not, what determines your growth as a leader is your attitude towards receiving it, right? This is a tough thing. It really is. We naturally get defensive whenever someone criticizes us, right? Again, talking about the environment that we're in. However, if we are strong in that first one, if we're really grounded in reality, then we can objectively look at the criticism and take responsibility for it if warranted. The third thing, you need to accept yourself. There's one thing to know yourself, it's another to accept yourself. This is where maturity comes from. Okay? You know, if you've worked hard to change yourself, you've done the right thing, you've known, you've tried to make the changes based on the criticism that you've received, you've really given it your best effort, you've shown that self-discipline that we talked about, then the question is, what else can you do? Right? There comes a time where as a leader, you must accept yourself. But in order to accept that, you have to have gone through those checklists of other things that I just mentioned. You know, if you worry too much about what people think of you, it's because you have more confidence in their opinion than you do of your own. So think about that, right? Have that confidence, take responsibility, and accept, if necessary. That shows maturity. The fourth thing, you need to forget yourself at times, meaning it's not all about you. Okay? Secure people forget about themselves so they can focus on others. So you've gone through the first three, you know yourself, you've changed where necessary, you've accepted yourself. And then there's time to say, okay, it's not about me anymore. I can't continue to either put up the armor or feel bad or too reflective. Now it's time to act and really do what leaders are meant to do, and that is to add value to others. So sometimes you got to forget yourself, and that's where security in leadership comes from. Got a quote from Aristotle. Criticism is something you can avoid easily. You can avoid criticism. And you can do that by saying nothing, doing nothing, and in reality, being nothing. Very strong quote. As a leader, you should welcome criticism. It makes you better. It allows you to see yourself objectively. It allows you to make those changes if necessary to become a better leader. That is an essence of a good leader, is that ability to self-reflect when criticism is brought their way. And as John Maxwell said in the first quote, it's going to come your way whether you're successful or if you're failing. So learn to take in that criticism and benefit from it. Our questions, or question, singular. Where am I defending myself and pretending I have it all together when I should be gracefully accepting criticism and striving to improve? Self-reflection time, 1 minute. Are you gracefully accepting criticism and striving to improve? Twenty seconds. And time. So as I've mentioned a couple of times, John Maxwell mentioned whether we succeed or fail, we're going to be criticized. But surprisingly, failure has benefits. They have benefits if we learn from them. So our fourth item on our list of 5 is to admit and learn from our mistakes. Five items. The biggest mistake you can make is not asking what mistakes you are making. Right? If you don't care, then you're not going to be reflective. You're not going to welcome that criticism. And so if you are making mistakes, you're not going to have the opportunity to learn from them, to get better, to grow as a leader. First, admit your mistakes quickly, right? You're almost constantly in this evaluation mode of yourself and the results that you're getting through your leadership and your interaction with people, right? Because if a mistake is made, you want to accept it quickly, right? Get it behind you. Address it right now. Don't fester over it. Don't let it linger. Because if you recognize a mistake and you don't admit it quickly, people under your charge or those in which you're influencing, other members of your team, are going to go off and start to talk. And then there's going to be a whole narrative that's starting to get created when in reality, you could have stopped that from happening if you admitted your mistakes quickly. Right? So as soon as you recognize it, reflect, take in what needs to be done, and if necessary, make that apology, make that admission, take that responsibility, take that accountability that we've been talking about, do it quickly. Because it's not the number of mistakes you make. It's the number of times you make the same mistake, right? So admit your mistakes quickly. Then accept your mistakes. Mistakes are the price of progress. You know, if some would say if you're not failing, you're not trying. Right? It's easy to play it safe. It's easy to stay in an area where we're perfect. We can bat 1,000, so to speak. Well, if you're going to bat 1,000 because you're playing Little League, then you're never going to make it to the major leagues. Right? You need a pitcher who's going to challenge you. You need situations professionally that are going to challenge you. Because that challenge is the price of progress. It's where you're going to make the mistakes. And then learn from your mistakes. Admit them, accept them, right? Don't deflect them, accept them, and then learn from them. You know, you want to learn from those mistakes so that you can help others. You get very little wisdom from success, as I was just talking about, right? Wisdom comes from failure. That's where it comes from, right? So learn from those mistakes. Mine it for those good things, right? You can either run from your mistakes and hurt yourself, or you can learn from them and help yourself, right? Do you want to hurt yourself or you want to help yourself? And if you learn from that mistake, then you're putting yourself on the path to progress. This is a great quote by Tom Brady. I read this in one of his interviews. If you're working hard at the wrong things, then you're working hard at getting worse. This is part about learning from mistakes. If you're not reflecting and trying to learn from that, the thing is you're probably going to do it again. And when you do it again, you're just going to reinforce that same mistake because you didn't learn from it the first time. So take a little advice from the great one, Tom Brady. If you're working hard at the wrong things, then you're working hard at getting worse. You also need to question yourself and others, meaning questioning a decision after it's made is not good teamwork, right? It's questioning yourself and others before you actually step across that line, before you actually make that decision. So if you're questioning yourself and others, if you're reflecting, saying, okay, last time I did this, I acted too quickly. This time I'm going to take a quick pause and I'm going to think before I actually make this direction or give this particular comment. Then the chances are you're going to learn from your mistakes. It's the questioning of yourself and others, this constant review that helps you prevent from the mistakes. But the thing is, if you didn't make the mistake earlier, you don't know the question. So start this process of admitting, accepting, learning, and then question in order to hopefully mitigate making the same mistake twice. As we said, it's not the number of mistakes you make, it's the number of times you make the same mistake. Give permission to push back. In other words, be willing to solicit feedback, right? Way back, I think it was in January of last year, we did a leadership live, and I talked about FMFM1, Fleet Marine Force Manual 1. And in there, it talked about how it's every Marine's duty to offer their frank and honest opinion up until the decision is made. And that goes from the lowest private to the highest general. We expect everyone to offer their frank and honest opinion up until the time the decision is made. This is the case here. We want to give others the permission to push back, to challenge us, right? They may see what we don't see. And if we're not willing to listen to them, then the chances are we're going to make a big mistake. So even though we want to learn from mistakes, and I keep on saying that you can't make progress unless you make mistakes, it is also foolhardy to knowingly make a mistake when someone could have prevented something from causing a problem. So give permission for others to push back. Another quote from Mr. Maxwell: "Too often leaders would rather have followers who turn a blind eye." Too often leaders would rather have followers who turn a blind eye instead of ones who speak with blunt tongues. Right? We need to welcome that criticisms I mentioned earlier, and the way you do that is actually creating an environment where you give permissions for others to push back. And again, as I mentioned in the very beginning, you don't have to be the manager, you don't have to be the executive, right? You can go to your teammates and say, hey, you need to keep me honest here. If you see me start to screw up, tell me, right? Having that influence, having that relationship is not a hierarchical one, it's actually an influencing one. What are our questions in this section? What mistakes am I overlooking or failing to admit? And what lessons am I missing as a result of that? Take a minute and think about where you're becoming just too defensive, right? And not accepting mistakes. You're overlooking or failing to admit that you made a mistake. And because of that, what lessons are you not getting? 1 minute. Thirty seconds. Okay, time. So we're at 4 after the hour, about to go into our final section of the 5. So our final area of self-leadership is to become a great learner. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. So become the best learner. In order to become the best learner, you must invest in yourself first, which means you need to understand that it's going to take an investment of time. In some cases, it's going to take a monetary investment. Let's say you want to go out and get a certification, or you want to buy books or take a course or those sort of things. There's probably a monetary piece to this, but largely, when you invest in yourself, you're investing time in your development. Whether that is reflecting on some of the answers that you wrote down so far in your OneNote or on your pieces of paper, whether that is watching a podcast, picking up a book, asking for feedback, getting some mentoring, whatever the case may be, invest in yourself first. John Maxwell would say, you cannot give what you do not have. So unless you invest in yourself, you can't acquire the skills, knowledge, and abilities to be a good leader. So to be a good leader, you need to be a good learner. Invest in yourself first. Most leaders want to grow their organization or their team, but they're not willing to grow themselves. And because of that, they cannot grow their team. That's called the law of the lid. In John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, the first law of the lid, is saying that the height of your organization, the height of your team, will only go as high as your leadership. So in order to have your team grow, have your organization grow, you've got to raise your leadership lid. And you do that through learning and investing in yourself. Kirk Campmeyer, who was one of John Maxwell's initial mentors, said, if you want to become a self-aware leader, you have to be an intentional learner. There is a connection between self-awareness and learning, because learning is giving you knowledge. And then from that knowledge, often you're going to reflect on that to see how you can apply it, whether it indeed applies to you, whether you should, discount it because it's not a good fit for who you are, going back to knowing yourself. But in order to be a good self-aware leader, you have to be a good learner. You must not only invest in yourself, it must be a continual process. Meaning learning must be a continual process. Every person we meet has the potential to teach us something. Every opportunity that we engage in has the potential to teach us something. So maintaining an attitude of teachability is essential to being a continual learner, right? The greatest obstacle to discovery isn't ignorance or lack of intelligence. It's the illusion of knowledge, right? I'll say that again. The greatest obstacle to discovery isn't ignorance or a lack of intelligence. It is the illusion of knowledge, right? You cannot conquer the world by staying in a safe harbor. You've got to maintain that attitude of teachability, that inquisitiveness, that curiosity, right? That desire to make yourself better, to invest in that continuing learning process. The moment you stop learning is the moment you stop leading. Rick Warren wrote that in Purpose-Driven Life, right? The moment you stop learning is the moment you stop leading. So a connection between learning and self-awareness, a connection between learning and leadership. They're all connected, and that learning piece is one of the linchpins. So how do you become a continual learner? Number one, read daily to grow yourself. A book, a podcast, an article, a blog, anything that is going to allow you to get new information, allow you to objectively consider the information and grow from it. Not only should you read, but you should listen to gain perspective. Listen to others. Again, those teammates, whether they're a subordinate of yours or a teammate of yours, listen daily to gain perspective. Everyone has walked a different path in life, and you can learn from their perspectives. Then think daily and apply the learning that you've read about or the things that you've heard. You've taken it on board. You've done that reflectiveness. You've added it to your strengths or weaknesses, and it's one of your strengths. How do you apply it? If you discover something that's one of your weaknesses, who can complement you? Think about it daily in order to apply it. And this is something that John does. He physically files things away every single day to preserve his learning. I put a lot of my stuff in OneNote. So whether that's a book summary, whether it's a webinar I've attended, I'll make some notes. We have great tools available to us today that many of us didn't have over the many years and decades, and that is AI. Whether it's Otter, or Phantom, or some of the other tools out there, you have the ability to actually capture just about everything that you're hearing. And then you could take that and file it away in order to preserve the learning, right? But the whole key of it is you got to read it, listen, and then think about it as well, right? You can't just collect it from an AI bot and then put it out in OneNote and think that you're going to learn from it. It's not the case. You actually have to read it or listen to it. You got to think about it and then archive it away for learning. John Maxwell, the road to success is uphill all the way. The road to success is uphill all the way. And most are not willing to pay the price. They would rather deal with old problems than find new solutions, right? Finding a solution is because you learn, right? You're gaining more intelligence. You're teaming with people who are complementing your weaknesses, right? That is how you solve problems. But if you rather deal with old problems and or find new solutions, if you rather deal with old problems, then don't continually learn. Just stick your head in the sand like an ostrich and you'll stay right where you're at. If you've always done, if you always do what you've always done, you always get what you always got, right? Look for progress through your learning. So, questions for this one. When am I with my team or colleagues, is my desire to be an expert or to learn? So when you're with your team or colleagues, is your desire to be an expert to learn? Are you looking to give knowledge or are you looking to receive information, knowledge, and intelligence? This is a tough one for me. A lot of times I'm always giving information instead of taking it in. And then secondly, how often do I simply listen? Don't talk, don't respond, just listen. How often do I admit I don't understand something so I can learn? One minute. Oh, fine. Sorry, I had another one there. What do I need to do to change my attitude and become a learner? Thirty seconds. And time. So what are our next steps? Right here at 5:04 after the hour, right on time. Number one, reflect, right? Take time to quietly sit and think. Read through the answers to those questions that I had out there, right? Reflect on how you can develop greater self-awareness and how that self-awareness can lead to better leadership. Reflect on how you can learn to become more self-aware. Reflect on how you can learn to become a better leader. And if you're coming up empty, read, listen, think, and as we just found out, file. Become a continual learner. Those are our next steps. In the last 5 minutes, what questions are there out there, or comments that people would make, or maybe even a reflection you discovered based on your questions and answers, or just your analysis of today's information?
Hey, Scott. I do
Yes.
have a question based
Sure.
off the last thing you went over. I know you were talking about ways to improve yourself, and you had read every day and then also listen.
Correct.
Is there an advantage to reading over listening, like say an audiobook, as opposed to picking up the physical book and reading it?
Yeah, it's actually a great question, and perhaps I should have been more specific going back to one of our initial slides. When we're talking about listening here, we're talking about listening to others, right? So it's not finding a book on tape and listening to that. That's not the listening we're talking about. I would put that listening in the same category as reading. You're taking in content, written content, whether it's, audio or otherwise. Listening is listening to others for their experiences. So that's the listening I mean. Make sense?
I do think
Yes,
there
sir.
are studies that show that actual reading a book is you retain what you're reading more than if you were listening to it, because you're able to put the pictures in your head, so it stays in your brain a little bit longer.
You're absolutely right, Meredith. And they say even more than that, after you've read it, then write it, summarize it in a bullet or something of that nature. Does someone else had a comment? All right, I'm gonna give the people an opportunity either to place it in the chat. Give me one step that you're going to take after this Leadership Live that you wouldn't have taken prior to the Leadership Live. Just put one out there in the chat. Looking for the first one to the mark. What's something you do differently? Melissa, all right. Wanting to read more. So Melissa, along those lines,
Michael Tate,
say again?
reinforce that message.
I'm sorry, someone was speaking. I didn't mean to step on you. So Melissa, since you were first to the mark in there and you want to read, I have this little book for you. It's called The Self-Aware Leader by John C. Maxwell, and I'll deliver it down to your desk. So when you come into the office after the snow day, you'll have that there for you. So well done. All right. So if you want to learn more in these subjects, these are the 4 books I would recommend. All of them are easy reads. Right? The Self-Aware Leader, as I just mentioned, that'll be given to Miss Davis. I mentioned Rick Warren. We had a quote in there called The Purpose-Driven Life. I talked about initially, discover what your purpose is. That will help in that regard. Great book by John Maxwell, Developing the Leader Within You 2.0. It is in our library, and I highly recommend that book. Again, great reference material, something you want to read, annotate, and then capture. And then finally, Jeff Henderson wrote a book called What Are You For? And it's very interesting about what are you for yourself? What are you for your team? What are you for your customer? And he takes you through that thought process of discovering what that is, so you get continuity of what you're doing. So those are the 4 questions or books I would recommend. And a reminder that next month, we've got Visionary Leadership coming in February. So in our final minute, final comments, final questions. All right, once again, my thanks to Dr. Fubar and to Campbell, and everyone be safe out there in the snow, especially if you're out on the roads, and we'll see you next month on Leadership Live. Cheers all.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Scott.
Thank you.
You're welcome.